Hi everyone, let's talk about Hallertau, which I just did a full 2-player playthrough for. If you haven't seen that yet, it's linked in the description. This is just where I'm talking about it, so if you want to see it all in action and laid out on the board and stuff, there you go, laid out on the table rather than the board. Anyway, so what do I think about it? I absolutely love this game. This is currently, and we're getting close to the end of the year now, this is one of my favourites of this year. I will say, kind of prefacing that, if you're not familiar with my channel, I tend to love, these maybe you might find them boringly themed Euro games. I love Uwe Rosenberg games in particular. Loads of his releases, kind of more on this side of things. I know he's done all of the Polyomino games. Some I've liked more than others. But, the big meaty Euros, the Agricolas, At the Gates of Loyang's is where it's at for me. So Hallertau is the latest game in what's now called, I'm not sure if there's been one before this, but it's now called the expert level of Lookout Games. Is the kind of box size you would expect from A Feast for Odin or, say, The Colonists. Great big fat box, but yeah, packed with a lot of cardboard. So in this game, we are... Just from the description of things, it might sound a lot like other Uwe Rosenberg games. We are using worker placement to get animals and get crops, plant those crops, try and get more, and fulfill different cards. From that kind of basic description, you could describe a few of them. You could definitely kind of describe Agricola in those kind of terms, but I think Hallertau is a very different game. Not thematically, you can argue how different that is. But certainly in the gameplay itself, while it kind of has these elements that might be echoes of some of Uwe Rosenberg's other games, I don't really think that this has the feel of any of them. It's got some similarities, but yeah, it's very much its own thing, and I love what that thing is. So going in on our first game, we very much enjoyed it, but I kind of left it thinking, well, that was good. I want to play this more though, because I'm not really feeling the excited love for it, and some things were bothering us about that first play, and I think part of that is down to being familiar with Uwe's other games, especially say Feast for Odin, which is another great big game. It's the last. I was surprised to learn that was the last expert level, if we're now calling it that, game that Uwe has done. 4 years it's been since the last one, and in that game that's got a ton of things going on. I won't go into that. I've done a couple of videos for that if you're interested in a great big Euro game involving polyomino pieces, but there are tons and tons of cards in that game, and you will draw quite a few in your game, but I find myself in that playing very, very few of them and not really being bothered, to the point where you draw these cards, and there was questions about whether you need to draw a few and pick one and all that stuff, where to the point where the expansion added a part where you could discard cards for points, because if things aren't if you aren't drawing the right cards, they're completely useless to you, and you can get some compensation for it. So that's kind of the way I went into Hallertau, thinking in those terms, that just, well, I want to do these things, and I'm not really bothered about cards. Whereas after a few plays of it now, I've played this 5 or 6 times. I can't remember, at least 5 times now. Most of those solo, I think, 3 of those have been solo games of it. And I'm not sure how essential it is, but card play is for me where it's at. It's where I'm having the most fun with the game. And I think that early on we were kind of thinking as moving the community center, the kind of big draw of the game, this interesting, very different thing where there have been things like in Reykholt that was a couple of years ago. That's kind of the I don't know what you call them. Would you call them like the medium level of Uwe's games, the faster things that are still nice and chunky, but have got a bit less overhead, a bit faster, like your Nusfjords and your Glass Roads. Reykholt was a bit easier than that, but that wanted you to have a particular configuration of goods to advance on your points track, so you can kind of see there's some similarities to other Uwe games, but here we need an increasing amount of certain goods to move these craft buildings along. As soon as you've moved every craft building along, maybe similar to how the resources work in Glass Road, your community centre immediately moves and consumes that gap, but you will get more workers for it, and then at a certain point you will get more points for moving it beyond a certain point. At the start, I was kind of seeing it as Well, that's one way you could go. Or you could go for playing cards, or you could maybe go for animals and stuff. And I kind of think now, it's still very early days, of course, just from playing these few times. I now kind of think of the community center as something you will probably do. You will probably do a lot of it. Not necessarily get it to the very end. You'll probably get it close to the end, just over the course of the game. And it's about what else you can do while keeping up with all of that, rather than that just being your focus. Just getting that to the end and getting the 70 points for it seemed fantastic at the start, but yeah, you can get a lot more done than that from bonus cards and points cards. Although, yeah, but I really, really love the bonus cards because they give you certain goods. They might give you sheep. They might give you tools. New fields every single round. So especially if you can get them out early, they can be really, really rewarding. Even if it's just a couple of crops. If you run out of a particular crop, you have to waste an entire action going over there and getting some more. Whereas if you can keep planting them, or if you can get fresh ones to plant from bonus cards, that's a whole action you don't need to think about. There are a ton of different cards in this game from many different sets, like say in Feast for Odin, they came that way. They're all mixed up in mine now, but I remember they're all separate. And Newsfield has its own divided decks. It does say in the rulebook, maybe you can mix them, but they haven't been designed for that, so maybe keep them separate. So it's got all of these different cards that you choose a set from your gateway cards and your farming cards at the start of the game. And yeah, you are drawing cards that... Yeah, I can kind of see the argument that it's similar to Feast for Odin. You might draw a card and that's completely useless to you. But yeah, still from limited experience, I don't feel like that's an issue whatsoever. It was something that after my first game I was thinking, oh, well, I've got all these cards, none of these were any good for me. But they probably were. I probably could have gotten away with. I played I think one card that got me points that first game, and I was just focusing on getting the community center done, not seeing that bending what you wanted to do rather than having a kind of set idea of what I'm going to do this round. Well, I've got this card now. Well, maybe I just do that. It's not much of a diversion. I could just leave what I'm doing a little bit, go to this card, and suddenly I've got all these resources, and a lot of your cards lead you to draw bonus cards, the things that will kick off every round. And so it's having that kind of variety just from drawing all of these cards, and so many of them are just going to be useful anyway, aren't a million miles away from your reach. Loads of the cards have options in them, so they might need a massive amount of barley to fulfill this card, but also there are other options that will give you slightly less reward for having less of the thing. Loads of the cards don't even need you to give things up, which is a massive advantage as well. They just need you to have the stuff, and then you can play the card. The fact that you can play the cards... The rulebook does say a few times you can play them literally at any time, and then it introduces all these restrictions. But for the most part, yeah, you can play these cards at any time. When it's cards that want you to give up your fields, you can play them just after you've harvested your fields and your fields have all gone down. As an aside, I really like that kind of concept brought into the game, although I don't know anything about farming. That's a term I've vaguely heard of, laying fields fallow. I know you need to do it. But that, yeah, the more you use your fields, the less effective they become. If your fields are really top notch, you can plant one crop and you'll get 5 back in harvest. And it's not like Agricola where you have to wait round by round to pull one off at a time. You get all 5 back at the end of this round. But if you keep continually using your fields, they're going to get less and less effective over the course of the game. You need to lay them fallow so they'll start coming up again. But yeah, you can wait until... So a card wants me to spend 3 fields. Well, I'm going to plant everything in those fields, let them get worse, and then I will spend them so that I'll spend them in their worst state so I can get the most out of them. If I need to spend sheep, I can play that card after those sheep have gotten me milk. Or just before, your sheep in this game have got a limited life. They've only got 3 rounds before they die of old age, so spending them can be an advantage. While it's not literally any time that you can play the cards, there is a ton of freedom, especially, you can play them on other people's turns because some are affected as well. I'm not sure in the different sets. The gateway cards, at least, are divided into difficulties. So I'm not sure if there's any in the beginner set, but there are cards with these brown backgrounds that concern the state of the board. I've only seen one, actually, in my game, which I'll plug again. Oh, I do apologise. My Gaming Rules playthrough, I went on Paul Grogan's channel and we did a live 2-player game where that's the only card I've seen so far, far where it is when an action space is completely full. You can trigger this card and get your bonuses, and that can happen not on your turn. You can be waiting for other people to do it. I think I triggered it myself. But the worker placement is an interesting new start as well, that it's not just worker placement from the perspective of somebody's taking that space. That's not available for me anymore. There is a kind of 3-tiered system where the first person to go there only costs them 1 worker, then 2 workers, then 3 workers. There are spaces to get more cards, so even more options to get them, and that will get you first player. The first player can kind of pinball around until the last person to take it that round will get first player next round. But the action spaces have up to 3 chances to do that action. Depends how much you're willing to pay for that action, how many workers you're willing to give up, how many workers you've earned from moving your community centre along, and only the top layer of workers is going to get taken off each round. So it's not, the more popular an action is, the less you're going to get to do it. I'll say that kind of system seems perfect for a 4-player game of it. Which is going to be longer and everything, just like 4-player games are. Although a lot of these phases can be played simultaneously. I will say that my playthrough is kind of long, but the game itself, we played our very first 2-player game of this in about 90 minutes, when we didn't even know what we were doing, really. And I don't think the live playthrough with Paul was that much longer, even though we were playing it, remotely. And solo games of it have been at most an hour, and that's me. I'm a pretty slow player, especially if I haven't got anyone that I'm worried about holding up. If I'm just sat there on my own, I will just take the time and just have a big old think about things. So it's quite a fast moving game. But I was saying about the workers getting removed in any player count less than 4. So in a 4-player game, every round the top layer of workers is removed, no matter how many were there on a space. So if that space has only been used once, it's got all 3 spaces available again, and if it had been full up, it will just have the 3s taken out. So if you want to use it, you've got 1 chance, and you're going to have to pay the most expensive for it. In any player count less than that, each round you will remove basically the board is split up into quadrants, and you will remove the number of quadrants equal to the number of players. So in a 2-player game, it's even. In that you have this deck of quadrant cards, and in a 2-player game, it means that the pairings work out so that each quadrant is going to come up equally. Now that's kind of good in that respect, but there is a little bit of a thing. Again, I don't know how much this is my perception, because I'm not a game designer, and I've only played it like 5 or 6 times, so what do I know? But I'll say that kind of based on how much you want to do an action, it is, it's random based on those 6 cards over the 6 rounds of the game. That action that nobody really cares about might come out loads early on, like, say, the town hall. Am I saying the name right? Well, I know I'm pronouncing it right, but I think it's the town hall that lets you move one of your craft buildings back, and you get jewelry that is a wild card resource that's so powerful that can just let you move craft buildings straight forward. That building, you're getting cleared off in the first round in particular. Nobody can use that building, and if that keeps getting cleared off early on, that might not be as effective as when you're desperate to do it later on in the game. And that, I can see that might just be a perception, and that it's not that big a deal. Like, say, the sheep shearing. If you've got a ton of sheep, you get a wool for every sheep with that action. Early on, it's effective because it can give a sheep an extra round of life, and once they've gotten into the stables, they're safe for the rest of the game and are going to earn you a point each at the end of the round. But every sheep gets you a milk at the end of every round, so it can be really useful building them up, and that action space gets you a wool for every sheep every round. And so if that just gets cleared loads early on in the game, well, you've hardly got any sheep early on in the game. Later on, though, when you're desperate to do it, well, what if quadrant 1, I think it's in, what if all those cards have already come out and it's just never going to get cleared out again? Yeah, I don't know how much of that is going to have a real impact on the game, but it is a kind of it's a little road bump that's, I thought, playing it, especially like in 1 and 3 players, there are times when you will roll a die or flip a coin to decide between 2 of the quadrants as well. So yeah, it's not even which ones are going to get cleared out. I don't know how big a deal that is, but let's move on to other things. So yeah, tons of variety in the cards. And the cards have a nice, you're not on rails with what you must do, but they have a really nice way of opening up all these opportunities, especially when you are drawing more and more and seeing, okay, well, all of these want crops. These can get me tools that can be massively useful early on. The boulder system is a really nice kind of, well, I don't know about thematic, but it's a nice way of having the actual components of the game reminding you of the cost of things. That the tools, like, rather than just saying to you, well, you can move your building for free this space, and then your second movement of it in the same round costs you 1 tool, and every movement after that costs you 2 rules. Well, 2 tools. The rules say that having these actual boulders there, and it's thematic that the tools, you need the tools to move the boulders, and they're just exhausted. You don't have to get them brand new every round, and you can just get them for a worker. So having workers left over is generally not a bad thing because you can get tools with them instead. But having those boulders there, it's laid right out for you that how many boulders do you need to move? 1 tool. How many boulders do you need to move everyone after that? Well, there's 2 bunched up now, so two tools. It's a nice little way of having a little component there reminding you of the thing without the need of a player aid or being reminded from somewhere else. It's right there in front of you what you are going to need to spend. I'll say that as interesting as I find the craft buildings and moving them around, I don't know that I've got the kind of foresight and planning to be able to, especially as the game gets later on and these things cost more and more resources and you have loads of resources stacked up. I haven't quite got the kind of foresight and planning and maybe patience to work all of this stuff out. Maybe more in a solo game, but certainly not if I'm keeping people waiting, of all of these different variables, and especially because different resources can be used on different buildings, it could definitely be an analysis paralysis warning for players that maybe take a while on their turn. That could be a massive thing, and I will admit that I tend to just kind of, well, I want to get these things done, and then we'll just wing it for the crafts phase and just hope that I've got enough to move all of these things. I could see the craft buildings as being a way of falling behind in the game, especially perhaps early on. If you didn't leave yourself with resources to move them at least 1 space, it means, if everyone else has got more workers than you and you just didn't get, you've essentially got a free movement of each building. You have to pay the resources, but no tools. So you want to get them moving a little bit each round, and if you could get it moved 2 in a round from having just the right combination of stuff, or maybe you've got some jewelry to get wildcard moves, it's even better for you. But it could potentially be a thing where you would fall behind just from having a lot fewer workers than everybody else. But the rulebook does warn you, especially for things like clay, don't leave yourself with none of it because you need it for this particular building. There's nothing else that you can have. And it's nice, the little restrictions that you need more than this or just one of this. They're nice little things for keeping you needing a lot of different things. And then if you haven't gone for sheep, for example, at all, and meat and milk are going to be hard for you to get, then you can always go for the jewelry instead that will get you loads of stuff. I think that there is a ton of replayability in this, in that even though these action spaces are going to be exactly the same, and largely the crops and stuff that you're doing are going to be that kind of core thing of placing workers and playing cards, that's going to be the same. But I have found, again, admittedly just in 5 or 6 times, I've gone in really different directions, whether it's just from hardly having any sheep and just slaughtering them, not really planting much, to having just great big fields full of 8 things and trying to plant loads of them every time and just getting a wealth of resources, to just getting out loads of cards and building up to get just the right points cards, to having great big kind of stacks of bonus cards, getting a ton of things each round, and they're all worth points as well to varying degrees that can be a real boost to your score. I found it wildly different and very, very interesting, and especially since for solo this just is in A Feast for Odin, certainly, and I think they did it for Newsfield. The Board Game Geek community kind of come together to come up with these solo challenges where it was, start off with this set of cards and let's all play it with this configuration and see what we did and see who can get the best score, but just see what your playstyles are. I loved that for Feast for Odin when I first got it. Admittedly, I think I was doing videos when I got Feast for Odin. Yeah, I definitely was, but it was kind of early on when I didn't have all of these games around me to do. But yeah, I've played Feast for Odin a ton in the first kind of month or so that it was out, and those solo challenges really helped with all of the different things. So I imagine that is coming. Keep an eye out. Subscribe to the Board Game Geek forums for Hallertau, because I bet you something great is going to come there as well. But just from the random setup, the solo game is fantastic. Although it's not, and I will say that I have said in the past that just beating your own score isn't as interesting as having these different goals or having an AI opponent. And I think kind of clarifying that now, I think that, yeah, just beating your own score is okay, but as long as there is something different going on in the game, as long as it's not just this is the exact same game that you would be playing before. Like the main example is that I never found Agricola solo that interesting because it was just me on the exact same worker placement board, but there's just me there now. And this board is there for a certain number of players. Some things did change based on solo, I'll give it that, but there was no kind of, just in Feast for Odin, the game is largely the same, but, and in Newsfield as well, you alternate your workers. So you place your workers in round 1, and they're still going to be there in round 2, and you've got to use different spaces in alternating rounds. I really like that. And in Hallertau, it's just that the quadrant coming off, it's just going to be one of those quadrants, so the spaces are still going to fill up. I think that's still enough to tighten up that action space board, although there is the kind of thing with the quadrant cards, and I don't know how much the randomness of that would affect the game as a whole. But anyway, the action spaces are crowded enough at one player, I think, that it's still a really interesting experience. And yeah, I'm really excited to dig into it more. I've mentioned that I've got all of these games that are kind of crying out to get played through as soon as possible, and I do a lot of this in my spare time and don't get the time to get to all of them. But yeah, Hallertau has kind of been calling to me to keep going back to it and having these sneaky plays of it, especially because it's just a fast thing. I'm sure I'm missing a million things that I wanted to say about this, but I feel that I've been going on and this is taking a while. See the playthrough, watch me on the Gaming Rules playthrough as well. Me and Paul Grogan talked at the end of it for 5 or 10 minutes about our thoughts about the game as well, if you would like some more that I'm sure I'm forgetting to say here. And yeah, hopefully I'll be back with a solo playthrough with some more difficult decks as well, because I used the most basic ones in here, the ones for your first game. Hopefully we'll get to come back to it as well. But yeah, absolutely fantastic game. Would be shocked if this isn't in my top 10 of the year. I love it, but the playthrough is there for you to decide for yourselves. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you for the next game. Bye everyone.